topic, I thought it was interesting that for families, there is a direct link in the rise of domestic violence cases during season on game days.
Mostly men who get very upset because their team has lost and they've punched a TV, they've punched a hole in the wall. They are very aggressive in their outward expression, and that is really scary.
So often it's thrown about oh, women are so emotional, but look how emotional men get over a game and losing a game.
Yeah.
Pull it together, men.
Yeah.
Welcome to Voices Against Violence, the Harmony House podcast, where we educate, empower, and give voice to survivors of domestic violence. Join us as we explore the critical issues, share powerful stories, and inspire action for change. I'm Charity Jordan-Rex, Prevention Education Coordinator for Harmony House.
And I'm Kristen Snell, Assistant Executive Director at Harmony House. And today we are talking about the NFL and domestic violence. And I think it's pretty obvious that this is a very aggressive sport and it brings out some pretty hot tempers. So this is something that we should definitely talk about. We see it in the headlines often when players are accused of domestic violence. So let's start that conversation.
So I feel let's just take a breath. I feel like some people might be oh my goodness, are they going to call up my team? Right. What are they going to say about the NFL? We're not anti-NFL.
Right. We're anti-domestic violence.
We're anti-domestic violence. Who's your favorite team, Kristen?
Okay, well, I'm a big bandwagoner. So currently bandwagoning for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Detroit Lions.
Okay. I'm from Cleveland, so I'm always going to root for my Browns. And if an Ohio team isn't in it, I don't care. But there is a direct connection between domestic violence and the NFL.
Yeah. So I did a little research and found some interesting numbers. So since the year 2000, there have been 134 players that have been arrested for domestic violence and 15 for crimes relating to sexual assault, battery, or isolation. And for NFL players, domestic violence is the highest criminal charge at 55% of total arrests made.
I also saw that statistic. For anyone who likes to doom scroll, here's another rabbit hole, because you can just Google domestic violence and NFL, and you will just see lots of, the headlines about different players that have been arrested, sexual assault allegations, domestic violence allegations.
Yeah, if you just Google domestic violence in sports, it's nothing but NFL. I didn't even have to really Google the NFL. It was just story after story after story about players who have been arrested. A few more numbers to throw out is the number of players that were accused in DV cases fluctuates every year. So in October of 24, which is the last number that I could find, there were 5 cases so far that year. There were 11 cases in 2023, 5 cases in 2022, and 3 cases in 2021.
When I was doing research on this topic, I thought it was interesting that for families, there is a direct link in the rise of domestic violence cases during season on game days. So there was a 10% rise, study showed, on domestic violence calls to local law enforcement on game days, especially if a big team lost.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And something that I've seen on social media, I don't know if you've seen it too, but random videos of mostly men who get very upset because their team has lost and they've punched a TV, they've punched a hole in the wall. They are very aggressive in their outward expression. And that is really scary. In doing research for this, I found that alcohol generally has something to do with that. There's a lot of drinking that goes on when watching football games, but then also with the rise of gambling and betting, that now there's more stakes. So when your team loses, and not that that excuses the behavior or domestic violence.
Well, and let's just say again, as we've said before, those things do not cause the domestic violence,
right,
but they can exacerbate
absolutely
the violence.
Absolutely.
So if you think about that abuser who, you know, they've been drinking all day, watching the game, their favorite team, maybe they have some money on it, their team loses, and now, you know, you've got that wife, the kids who are there, you know, who are really victim to whatever his expression is of anger and loss about that game.
Yeah, I also read an interesting story, and this was specific to the Super Bowl that just happened. And I don't know if anyone remembers this from the commercials, but there was a Tubi commercial where like the commercial looks like someone has your remote control and they're changing the station. And there was a survivor that shared her story that when that happened, she couldn't convince her husband that she wasn't the one changing the channel. And he was so irate that he actually punched a hole in the wall because he thought that she was changing the channel away from the Super Bowl.
Oh my God. I had not heard that. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
I also feel like as part of this conversation, we really need to talk about I think the normalizing of that kind of just over the top aggressive behavior that men tend to show during the NFL. And so often it's thrown about like, oh, women are so emotional. But look how emotional men get over a game and like losing a game.
Yeah.
Like, pull it together, men.
Yeah. Like, I'd like to point out, and I think we've mentioned this before in a previous episode of Travis Kelce, where there were a couple of times where he was like in his coach's face screaming because something wasn't going right in the game. I'm not a huge football fan. I don't know the technical terms for anything, but
no one's watching this for our knowledge of sports.
Yeah. Not ESPN over here. But like that expression, like, you know, football in general is like the goal is to like knock the other guy down, basically. So it's already a really aggressive sport. But then when you have folks who maybe who can't control their temper, you know, not to say that Travis Kelce is an abuser, but that is a red flag behavior. And he has a podcast that he shares with his brother, and he had mentioned in one of those episodes that he got kicked out of preschool, I think, for throwing a chair at a teacher. So to me, there's probably a pattern of aggressive behavior.
Well, I think also that it's a sport more so than other sports that attract the kind of person who already has that tendency to be physically violent and aggressive because it is, air quote, healthy outlet for that aggression. You know, I think there's a reason why you don't see these same stats for pro tennis players or, you know, like it is a sport where it's just inherently violent. You know, and that's another whole part of this that we're not even talking about, just like the violence in the stands. And when I looked at this, there were so many stats and so many stories about violence from the fans, like fighting one person. I guess in this past season, they were actually knocked out by like, and I feel like that kind of just gets glossed over.
Right.
But it's a whole culture of normalizing violence.
Yeah, it gets normalized because it's just football, you know, and that's how football is.
And men will be men.
Men will be men, and they'll be aggressive and mean, and that's okay because we've normalized that. But that is such a dangerous message, especially when you think about the young fans that are watching these games, whether they're male or female fans. And what is being normalized where, you know, you have players who get arrested for domestic violence and there's very little to no punishment. And that's not a great message to send that like, oh, you know, you're just a football player. Like, it's okay. It's not a big deal.
Well, it highlights really the injustice in the system. You know, these football players, they're millionaires. They're well known. They're famous. Yeah, they're going to get a slap on the wrist, if anything. You know, saw lots of articles about that, about the really light, minimal punishment that a player might get after, being arrested for domestic violence or those allegations coming out. So, I mean, it's just one big nasty cake, with all of these layers.
Right.
So you have the normalization of that violence that is just part of the culture of that sport. You have the lack of punishment, consequences for players that have been accused. Fans also, like, they don't lose fans.
Right.
People still are going to support their favorite players regardless, and are likely to not even believe those allegations until a video comes out.
Right. And that's so disappointing. And we've talked about this before, where when victims come forward, if there's no evidence, then people are going to blame her. They're going to not believe her. And then months later, a video comes out and everyone's like, oh my gosh, like, that actually did happen. That's terrible. And then the narrative starts to shift. But by then, you've not only done damage for that victim that came forward, but then also other victims too, that maybe are now seeing what's happening and they're like, oh, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to get that response.
Do you think it's possible within that culture? And I feel like all of these things are just so ingrained, like it's part of the culture surrounding the sport. Is it possible to remove that? Do we lose something? Like, what, like if we, okay, let's say there are harsh punishments. Maybe they kick a player off the team if he's been convicted of domestic violence. They're not going to draft a player that has that in their back, which I would love to see also. Yeah, let's just stop promoting people who have that kind of violent history. Like, why are we, aren't there other players? That's what I always wonder. Like, really, this is the best person that you can find?
Right. Like,
someone who has been accused of rape and domestic violence. There's nobody.
Right.
like no college anywhere.
From. Yeah.
Like, maybe abusers make the best players.
Maybe. Because they have aggressive tendencies. And they maybe have likely experienced trauma in the home, like we've talked about with generational violence, that maybe they didn't learn those healthy coping skills when it comes to conflict, that their solution to conflict is to be aggressive and hit someone, punch someone or something, throw something. And, something that we talk about often is educating our youth. So, my son wants to sign up to play Mighty Mites in the fall, and I'm absolutely dreading it, but he wants to do it. So I'm going to let him have it. I'm going to let him play. But those, he's 10 or 11. Oof, sorry. And so starting with those youth that are playing football, yes, this is an aggressive sport, but the aggression stays on the field. It doesn't go home to the family. It doesn't go home to your friends, to your intimate partner, whoever.
I think that's a really great point. If I can just interrupt you right there. I feel, when we're talking, we're always talking about this issue. It's so big, it's overwhelming. And so I'm sure people are like, well, what can we do? I think that is one place where it starts. I have sat on the sidelines of many a youth baseball game, and like the parents get so angry and they're yelling and they're cursing. Maybe, we check ourselves in that moment. Like, the kids are out there to learn how to play the sport. They're out there to have fun. So adults really need to be setting the example and what is actually healthy behavior. And it's not healthy behavior because you didn't like the refs or the ump's call to get in their face and yell. So then, you get kicked out of the ballpark.
Right.
Or your team even gets, I've seen that where the whole team gets kicked out because the coach can't control himself. So I think we really have to have some honest conversations about our behavior with sports. You can be excited, you can yell, you can be unhappy, like boo the ref. Okay. But we are adults, we make choices, and you are in control of how you respond to situations. And sports, so often, those are family events.
Right.
And so kids are watching. You don't have to explicitly tell them, this is right, this is wrong. And this is what I hear parents say all the time. Well, I don't tell my kids that. Kids, I think, learn most of what they're learning about what it means to be a person, to be an adult, by watching you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't have to explicitly say, like, it's okay to do this or not okay. They're going to watch what you do. And that is where they are learning, okay, when I get at someone that's upset at someone, this is okay.
Right.
I can get in there. I can get in someone's face. I can invade their personal space. I can yell at them until I get it all out of my system. So I feel like that is a great place to start. Baseball season, at least in my house, I have a stepson who's on a traveling league. So baseball season has started. It's a traveling league, so the stakes are real,
Yeah.
But you are setting an example. You are your child's first teacher and the best model of what is healthy and unhealthy behavior.
Right. Because like you said, even when folks are like, oh, well, my child didn't experience abuse, they are witnessing it. They're picking up way more than you think. And if you are at a sporting event and parent is upset at the ref and just going off the edge with how angry they are, and then you're riding in the car together on the way home and you're continuing that conversation, your kiddo is listening to that. And then you get home, and it always makes me wonder, like, what does home look like for this kiddo? Because if most of the time dad is so angry and so outward with that expression, like, what does he do behind closed doors if he's so willing to? And like you said, you can be upset, you can disagree with things, but you can do so in a way that doesn't promote violence.
Yeah. And yeah, I think if you are the parent of a young person who, throws his bat, I've seen that happen a lot of times, and, and throwing the bat because they're so upset, they're almost hitting the kid behind them.
Right.
Then it's your job as the parent, as the coach of that team, to take that young person aside and say, look, I know you're really upset, and help them navigate those moments in a healthy way. Give them some other approaches to dealing with those big feelings that they have, So I think that's one thing. I would love to see people be more vocal with their sports teams when a player is accused, arrested, allegations come out. Fans of people ought to be blowing up the social media of those teams saying, what are you going to do about this? This is not okay. Right. I mean, so that's another thing. You can make your voice heard. Voice your opinion on those teams.
Yeah, and having that conversation around not accepting that behavior. And then that leads to the conversation of this is not okay, but what is okay? And then we can have that education. One of the, I think, biggest domestic violence cases that we've seen recently from the NFL was, of course, Ray Rice back in 2014. So the incident between he and his then fiance happened in February of 2014. They were in an elevator. He knocked her out. She was unconscious, and he drags her out of the elevator. The video became public in September of 2014, so there was a little bit of time before it was public. But before the video was public, he was indicted for third-degree aggravated assault, and the NFL suspended him for 2 games. According to an ESPN report, so take this...
I saw this. Go ahead.
Yes, so take this with a grain of salt. But top team officials of the Baltimore Ravens knew almost immediately about the video, but chose not to do anything, and also lobbied the NFL for a lighter punishment. So they knew that this happened.
Let's just put a pin in that for a second.
Yeah.
So top officials at the NFL knew what was going to be on that tape. Not only did they not do anything about it, but they actually worked to get him lighter punishment.
Right. And my assumption is they did this because he was a very high-profile player. He was, I don't even know what position he plays, but he was a valuable position to the team, which doesn't excuse the domestic violence, but chances are they are making these arguments for light punishment because they don't want to lose him as a valuable player on the team. So once the video became public, he was suspended indefinitely. He was cut from the team, and he never played an NFL game again. So here we are with another example of nothing really happens until the video becomes public, and then there's this public outcry, and now it's like, okay, now we're going to take this seriously, and now he's basically out of the league, and he's never going to play again. And I remember from this time, there was an interview with him and his fiance, and I remember watching that and like watching her body language. And I was just
like, I just saw like a picture, a photo from that. I didn't watch the actual, but the body language.
Right. Because I think at some point in this process, I think she maybe recanted or changed her story a little bit, which is also not uncommon. But just watching that body language and how they interacted, like she looked down a lot. She could tell she was very uncomfortable. She was
just the one photo. She looked upset. She looked afraid.
Right. And so, you know, we talk about, you know, the different reasons why victims might recant. But here we are with a woman who's been viciously attacked, and the person who attacked her is one of the top NFL players making tens of millions of dollars. So if she comes forward, there's no telling what that conversation was like between the two of them, but I imagine he was probably making threats to her because he's probably telling her like, I'm going to lose out my contract. I'm not going to be able to play again. Like, this is all your fault. And again, we talk about the burden that victims bear, that they have to take on all this responsibility. And she's just coming forward and hoping that this never happens again. She's just telling her story. And it's so heartbreaking that we don't have a culture where we support victims. And so then you see videos like that, and it's just absolutely crushing because you know that she's so uncomfortable and she doesn't want, and she, you know, it's bad.
Yeah. It's really hard to watch those videos. And there's so many that have come out, not just about athletes, but other celebrities. I would just love to see the public respond to that with famous people the same way, and NFL players the same way they responded to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee.
Exactly.
And there were so many people, he did that and they're like, I'm done with the NFL. Okay, well, where's that take when the next Ray Rice video comes out? We have to start valuing people more than we value money. And we have to push back against the normalization of toxic masculinity, which is kind of a buzzword. But really what that is, you know, normalizing that aggressive, violent behavior against other people. That, you know, we can't keep saying, oh, men will be men. No, men have to learn and grow and evolve. And if you're really struggling, you know, then you need to go get yourself some help. Let's normalize that too.
Yeah.
Those days of men will be men, and this is just what they do. We have to push back against that. And when we do, then that environment is going to be a safer place, not just for the partners of NFL players, but for the kids who are watching, for the families at home whose partners are watching that game. Like that is going to move through the culture in a way that supports survivors. And that's the point.
Right. And the safer we can create this community and this culture, the more victims will feel empowered to come forward and hold more abusers accountable. All of the folks that you know, obviously the NFL players, that's high profile. So we're going to see that in the news. But we know that this is happening every single day, and it's not making the news. And those victims are hesitant to come forward for a multitude of reasons. But if we can create that safe culture, then it creates that space for them to come forward because they know that there will be validated, non-judgmental, and then the abuser can be held accountable so that it doesn't happen to anyone else or doesn't happen to them again.
That's how we reduce and hopefully eventually end domestic violence. We all have a role to play in that.
Yeah, absolutely. As we always say, an educated community is
a safer community. If you or someone you know needs help, help is out there. You're not alone. Give us a call at Harmony House on our 24-hour hotline, 417-864-SAFE, 417-864-7233. Or if calling isn't safe, you can chat 24/7 with an advocate on our website at myharmonyhouse.org. And we would love to get your feedback, any comments, suggestions. Please shoot them our way on our socials or via email at podcast@myharmonyhouse.org. Thanks for bringing this topic up, Kristen.
Thank you.
This is a good one.
We did it.